Hey, how you doing? It's good to be with you today. I'm Dennis Merritt Jones. I'm here to share some ideas with you today that I trust you'll be able to take into your life this next week and apply. But the very first thing I want to talk to you about, and if you've heard me speak before, you know I always ask this question first. And that question is, how are you breathing right now? How are you breathing? The reason I ask this question is part of a mindfulness practice is that it's when we are conscious of our breathing, of our breath, it brings us to the present moment. And it kind of tethers us to the present moment, which is where life, the only place life can be, waiting for us to show up so it may offer us its gifts. So welcome to the present moment, and I'm glad you're with me today. Today I'm going to be talking to you, the title of my lesson is Remembering the Way Home. Remembering the Way Home. And this, I love metaphor and parables and idioms and the teaching tools that have been made available to us by the masters throughout the ages. And today's lesson is one of those opportunities to learn through metaphor. Spiritually speaking, remembering the way home is the process of returning back to the source, the original source of our wholeness or our good, if you will. And not that we can ever be separated from it. And of course, another word for our wholeness or good is God. It's about remembering to return home to our oneness with God. Not that we can ever be separated from the one, but we can certainly enter into a belief in separation from the one, which then brings forth the experience of it. So let's talk about that, what that means for us today. The pull of the ego mind is always seeking external power, which it only can find in the temporal things of the world. And it's easy to be seduced, to get stuck in feeling separated from the world or separated from life because we forget where our good lies and we think that it lies outside of us. When we get to there, we think there is better than here. And when we get there, we discover it's no better than here. And so it's about learning to refocus our minds on the gifts that are present in the moment and take advantage of those gifts because they're there whether we use them or not. So remembering to remember the way home is the theme that I want to talk to you today about. And this is the journey of personal integration. I love the word integration because it comes from the root word integer, which is Latin. It means bringing all the parts together to the whole. So when we live with spiritual integration, we're bringing all the parts of our many fractured parts of our lives back to the wholeness and our remembrance of the oneness with God, and that God is present in each one of those aspects of our lives. We're born in wholeness. You can't not be born in wholeness because we all come from the one. You know, in the beginning there was only God, and God said, "Go there and be me." And here we are. We're being me. We're being it, being us as spiritual divine beings right here and right now. But the problem is that remembering that oneness is hard to do because the world is so convincing that we need to have something added to it in order to be whole. What happens is we get spiritual amnesia. Spiritual amnesia. And when we get spiritual amnesia, forgetting our integrity of our oneness with the divine, what we get is we begin to disintegrate. We disintegrate and fall apart from our remembrance of our oneness with the divine, with our source of our good. Personal reintegration is the journey of consciously returning home to the place in truth that we really never left. The place we never really left, which is, of course, our oneness with God. Our oneness with God. And that's really the theme that I want to talk to you today about. And I'm going to do it through a parable. The most profound lesson I believe ever taught by the great teacher Jesus is the parable of the prodigal son. Because he was a master teacher. He understood how to use parables and idioms and stories to illustrate points that the people in his day and time would understand. And this is one of the greatest teaching tools I've ever seen regarding bringing back an awareness of our oneness with God. So I want to tell you the story of the prodigal son very quickly, and then we'll review it and look for the metaphor on it and the personal application of it, because without personal application for it. As one of my teachers once said, realization without application is hallucination. we have to not just realize, but we have to apply. And this is time to have that realization, then the application comes afterward. So the story of the prodigal son is a beautiful story. It's a story of a man who he was a farmer, lived on a farm. He had two sons, older son and a younger son. And the younger son was very antsy, very anxious to get out into the world and see what the world was all about, because it was calling to him. And by the way, this is my interpretation, my conjecture of how the conversation between the father and the sons might have gone. So take it for what it is and draw whatever value from you can and discard the rest. So the father is with his two sons on the farm, and the younger son says, "Dad, the far country is calling to me. Will you please give me my inheritance now so I can take it and go to the far country and live?" Well, the father, being the unconditionally loving father he was, didn't argue. He just gave his son the inheritance, and the son left. He went to the far country. That's a very important metaphor, the far country. Remember that. So he's in the far country, and it says in the scriptures, in the story, that he entered into riotous living. And he spent all his money in riotous living. It reminds me of my college days a little bit. But soon enough, he ran out of the coin of the realm, and he was broke, in other words. So what he did, and hard times fell upon the land. A famine fell upon the land, which is another great metaphor. And so he took a job at a pig farm, mucking the stalls and feeding the pigs and cleaning the environment. And one day he became so destitute that he had no money, that he was eating the pig food, which is another good metaphor, part of the idiom that we're going to talk about. And he's sitting there, and he's just down and out, and he's thinking to himself, wait a minute. Even the servants back at Dad's farm have got it better than me. I think I'll rise and return home. Another metaphor. Okay. So he does. He rises and returns home, and sure enough, there's Dad off in the distance, and Dad turns and sees him and opens his arm and runs towards his son and embraces his son and says, "Oh, my son who is dead has come back to life." And he tells the servants, "Slay the fatted calf, bring the seamless robe, bring the best rings and sandals, and put them all on my son, and we're going to have a party." So they're in partying down, and again, it's my conjecture of how it happened. And the stay-at-home son, who was a good boy out in the farmlands, pulling weeds and doing his duties, hears all this ruckus going on in the house. So he returns back to the house, and he asks the servants, "What's going on here?" And the servant says, "Well, your brother who was gone, who's lost, has come back, and your father's celebrating that." Well, the older stay-at-home brother no more than hears that, and he starts raising a big stink, and he starts to complain, and it's not fair. So Dad comes out and says, "What's wrong, son?" And the son says, You just gave his inheritance to him, and my brother, and he left and spent it all and squandered it away on fast living and doing things a nice Jewish boy shouldn't be doing in pig stalls. And now he's back, and you give him slay the fatted calf and put the seamless robe on him, which is the most elegant garment available that day and time. Slippers, all the metaphor, the symbologies of the blessings of the highest of the best of the best. And the son said, "That's not fair. I've been here the whole time, being the loyal son, being out in the working, pulling the weeds and doing all my stuff, and you never give me any of that. It's not fair." And my mom would say, "Well, son, the fair is in Pomona," but that's not what the father says to the son. Father pulls his son aside and puts his arm on his shoulder. He says, "Look, son, you see all this out here? This in the distance? All this is yours. And it always has been. Don't you see it?" And of course, I'm sure the stay-at-home son at that one point, "Oh, yeah, got it." Well, that's the story in a nutshell. The prodigal son goes to the far country, squanders away his inheritance, comes back home through an awareness of wanting to return, rise, and consciousness and return home. Stay-at-home son doesn't like it at all. Father reminds the stay-at-home son he has always been blessed and to not resent it. So the metaphor of this story, of the meaning of the story that you can apply to your personal life, is profound and very simple to adhere to if you give yourself a moment to really enter into the consciousness first of the prodigal son. And by the way, it could be prodigal daughter for that matter. Okay, daughter, son, it's irrespective of our gender. The qualities are the same in the story. It's easy for the prodigal son consciousness to get seduced by race consciousness, thinking that there is better than here, to thinking that we'll find our power and our good in the things of the world, and metaphorically titles and possessions and all the things that the external world promises us. But when we arrive there and experience them, they always never live up to their promise, and we enter in disappointment, which is the time when the son went in, the land had famine and he went into starvation. Because wherever you go, there you are. You know, nothing is going to sustain you better than where you are originally. So you have to ask yourself this question: what part of the prodigal son or daughter consciousness lives in me that I think I need to go someplace else to do something, to add something more to my life in order to be fully content and joyful and appreciative of the life I have? The second character in the story, and remember that all the characters in the story are some aspects of each of us, all the characters. That goes for the whole scriptures too. But the stay-at-home son or daughter, is another metaphor or another idiom, which is really about the stay-at-home son. The consciousness is we too go unconscious and we forget the blessings that are right under our feet all the time. Because we're looking at what others have and resenting that, rather than being aware and mindful of the gifts that life has bestowed upon us in this moment. If we just stop and breathe and take stock of it and appreciate it and feel how blessed we are. Gratitude. Yeah. So the stay-at-home son or daughter is that person who's kind of unconscious. Part of our consciousness is asleep. We're not aware of the gifts that lay at our feet, and to live with gratitude, to wake up and remember how blessed we are. Now, the third character, of course, is the father in the story, and of course, the father is symbolic of God. Yes, God, and the father was unconditionally loving. Never, so when the son came back, the father didn't wag his finger and say, "You fool! You should not have gone and spent that money I gave you." He unconditionally loved him and embraced him and welcomed him back and restored his place in the family with the highest and best of everything. Unconditional love. Now there is a place within each of us where the Father consciousness dwells as well. And that happens when we remember to have the awareness of our oneness with God. God lives, loves, and expresses itself in, through, and as us when we're conscious of it. And when we're conscious of that place, you'll discover that we are equally, unconditionally loving to those in our lives, whether they deserve it or not. So coming home may require 4 things that I want to share with you briefly, 4 kind of applications of these ideas. As one of my teachers said, realization without application is hallucination. So this is the time where we need to realize these points, but also apply them in our daily life. So the first aspect of coming home that may be required is for you to come home is this: awakening to the fact that we're in the far country in the first place. We need to remember, which means to come back to the whole. Remember means come back to the whole, who we really are. So awakening to the fact that we're in the far country. Remember the state, or the prodigal son, when he was in the pig stalls, he had a remembrance of who he was. He awakened. Even the servants back home have it better than this. I will rise in consciousness, meaning I will have a shift in consciousness that allows me to go back home and ask for my father's forgiveness. And you notice the father didn't even forgive him because he had not judged him as doing anything wrong. So awakening first to the fact that you may be in the far country is the place to start. Take stock of where you are today in your life and see if you've separated yourself intentionally or unintentionally, from the awareness of your oneness with God. The second aspect that will help you come back home is forgiveness. Forgiveness what? Of self. Forgiveness perhaps of others for the mistakes that we make that have created a sense of separation from ourselves and God. I love to say God never forgives because God has never judged. And the only time we need forgiveness is when we've judged ourselves or someone else. And so that metaphor of the Father welcoming the Son back, he never judged his Son as being wrong. So there was nothing to forgive. The Son asked for forgiveness, but the Father didn't hear it because there was nothing to forgive. So forgiveness of yourself or forgiveness of others for the mistakes that you've made or they've made in our lives, when we really are willing to practice that degree of integrity, you'll discover that coming back home with the awareness of your oneness with God is a much easier journey to embark upon. The third aspect is humility and a willingness to grow. It's possible to return home like this prodigal son did, a changed person, a different person, if we have humility and we're open to learning the lessons that come with the experience. Humility comes from the root word humus, which is fertilizer. El toro caca. It's fertilizer, and isn't it interesting that some of our greatest lessons grow from the fertilizer of our pain and discomforts and mistakes that we make. And it takes humility to rise from those ashes and return back into the grace of the beloved who has never judged us. So, and the fourth thing that we might want to practice in order to return back home, to have that journey back home to the one, is spiritual integrity. To live spiritually integrated means that we bring the awareness of God's presence into every moment, every aspect of our lives every day. To reintegrate, to live with integrity, is to bring all the awareness of God's presence into all areas of our life in the present moment, irrespective of where we are or what we're doing, to fully be the very fullest expression of the divine that we can be. So let's bring wholeness of our unity, fully integrated and individuated selves that we are, to the world this coming week. Let's allow ourselves to integrate more fully with our world, whether it's at home or any place else that you may be. And these are challenging times, no doubt about it, to feel that sense of wholeness, because it's easy to get seduced by what's going on in the news and what's going on in the world, that things are not good for you in this moment. But the reality is, take a breath. Are you alive? Do you have a roof over your head? Do you have food in your tummy? You're pretty blessed. You're pretty blessed. That's living in the wholeness, the awareness of your oneness with Source. So we have to remember that there's no place like home. And as we know, home is not only where the heart is, it's where wholeness is, oneness, oneness, oneness. So I thank you for taking time to share this moment, this brief chat that we've had together today. And I hope that you take something out of this chat today that enriches your life, because when that happens, when you live an enriched life with mindfulness, the blessings that you bring to the world spill over into the world around you by way of your deeds and words and actions. And the world becomes a better place when you're living from that place of oneness with God. So I would encourage you to be mindful of that this week, breathe, and also bless your spiritual community and support your spiritual community for sponsoring these messages online, because, spiritual communities are having a challenge today. Yeah, there's no question about it. And they're there to support you in your times of need, and you're part of that membership to support them as well. So do that with your tithes, your gifts, your service, whatever it is you can do to support your spiritual community, so they can keep on keeping on doing what they do in the world, because by means of them, you make a difference in the world. So remember that who you are makes a difference. What you do with who you are makes a difference. And know that you are a blessing to everyone you come in contact with this week because you are living a life of purpose and meaning because you have returned back home. You remembered the way home, and that's what it's about. If you want to know more about myself, I took the story I shared this morning with you out of my book, Your Redefining Moments, Becoming Who You Were Born to Be, and that's the journey of returning back home is to the oneness with God. That's the remembrance of this book. So if you're interested in knowing more about my teachings, you may visit my website, DennisMerrittJones.com. And I bless you and I thank you for being part of my life this week. Know that your being there for me has made a difference as well. Until next time, peace.